Welcome to the America First Antitrust Forum. I'm Aiden Buzzetti, the president of the Bull Moose Institute, and I'm very glad you're able to join us today. The America First agenda has always been fundamentally about restoring balance, returning power to workers, to families, to small businesses, and to communities that were left behind by decades of policies that put global interests ahead of American citizens. That project has made real progress on trade, manufacturing, and energy. But there's a domestic dimension to this agenda that deserves equal attention: the structure of our own markets. For too long, Republicans and Democrats allowed the steady consolidation of economic power into fewer and fewer hands, not through competition and innovation, but through mergers, acquisitions, and the quiet capture of industries that Americans depend on every day. The result is an economy where too many workers have fewer employers to choose from, too many small businesses face dominant suppliers or buyers with no real alternative, and too many entrepreneurs find that the path to market is blocked before they ever get started. Detractors will say that we are against a free market, but what they're defending is a captured one. Restoring genuine competition, the kind that produces lower prices, higher wages, and real innovation, is as much a part of the America First vision as any trade policy or industrial strategy. This forum exists as a repudiation of the outdated and damaging economics of the last 60 years. Today, you will hear from enforcers, policymakers, and advocates who are working through the hardest questions: how to enforce our competition laws with rigor and discipline, how to distinguish consolidation that genuinely serves American interests from consolidation that simply serves shareholders, and how to build the policy and legal infrastructure for an antitrust agenda that puts American workers and communities first. These are not easy questions, and the people in this room do not agree on every answer. That's exactly why this conversation matters. It may feel like the landscape has completely changed since 2016, but ultimately, the conservative movement is still struggling on how to best reclaim the antitrust mantle. Therefore, the goal is not to develop consensus for its own sake. It is clarity, a clearer sense of what an America First approach to competition policy actually looks like in practice, what it requires of our enforcement agencies, and what it demands of us as policymakers. I'm grateful to the many people who have joined us today, and I look forward to the discussions ahead. And with that, I want to turn to somebody who is doing exactly that work, leading the Federal Trade Commission with a clear understanding of both the law and what is at stake for the American economy. Chairman Andrew Ferguson was confirmed as the 30th chair of the Federal Trade Commission and has moved quickly to reorient the agency, making the case for competition in American markets and signaling that the FTC will pursue antitrust policy with rigor. He has been a consistent voice for the proposition that protecting competition is not a partisan exercise, it is a governing one. We are very honored to have a recorded message from him for this forum. Please join me in welcoming Chairman Andrew Ferguson of the Federal Trade Commission. Thank you.
It is an honor and a privilege to address the America First Antitrust Forum organized by the Bull Moose Institute. Since its inception, the Bull Moose Institute has provided public officials with a clear vision of a truly conservative approach to antitrust that prioritizes the liberty, the ingenuity, and the livelihood of American citizens and their families. A truly conservative approach to antitrust does not take issue with bigness as such, but concentrated market power that impedes the political, technological, and economic independence of our citizenry and our nation. As Teddy Roosevelt explained so long ago, our aim is not to do away with corporations, but rather to promote those corporations whose prosperity depends upon genuine innovation that reduces the cost of production, makes our country a global leader in industry, and provides American citizens with steady, gainful employment. That's the core principle of an America First antitrust movement, and it conforms to what Roosevelt identified as the fundamental rule in our national life, which is that our national prosperity ought to be shared prosperity, one in which, on the whole and in the long run, we, the American people, shall go up or down together. A truly conservative and America First approach to antitrust does not then seek to strangle big business, but to ensure that the prosperity of big business takes the shape of good wages to the wage worker, reasonable prices to the consumer, and just treatment of business rivals and investors. That's been the guiding vision of this administration's approach to antitrust, which President Trump has tasked me to execute in my capacity as chairman of the Federal Trade Commission. The organizers of this forum offered two guiding questions for participants. What does America First antitrust action mean in practice? And what does its future hold? Those are both important questions, but I wanted to pay particular attention to the latter. What is the future of an America First antitrust? In brief, the future of an America First antitrust, to realize its promise of national prosperity that benefits all Americans, requires state and federal antitrust enforcers to leverage more than ever their consumer protection authority. In our recent past, Republicans have had even less enthusiasm for consumer protection than they've had for trust busting. But thanks to President Trump, this is no longer the case. Indeed, we need to understand that consumer protection, no less than antitrust, is an effective tool in fighting corporate power and misconduct. And no less than antitrust, consumer protection needs to be an integral part of an America First approach. The reasons for this are historical, tactical, and political. Congress adopted the world's first antitrust law in 1890. By the early 1910s, however, Congress had grown dissatisfied both with the judiciary's relatively narrow interpretation of the Sherman Act and with the Department of Justice's enforcement program. It therefore adopted two laws in 1914, the Clayton Act and the Federal Trade Commission Act. The Clayton Act addressed Congress's first concern by adding a host of new prohibitions to the antitrust laws that could attack not only a broader range of anti-competitive conduct in the Sherman Act, but also attack it in its incipiency. The FTC addressed both concerns. It created a new agency distinct from the Department of Justice to enforce the antitrust laws, and added a new prohibition against, quote, unfair methods of competition, end quote. That phrase was new to the law, and disputes over its meaning generated substantial litigation. Courts struggled to determine when a method of competition qualified as unfair, a question that continues to bedevil the Commission, courts, and businesses to this day. But in a seminal 1931 decision, the court determined conclusively that the statutory phrase, quote, method of competition, end quote, required the Commission to show that the challenged business practice inflicted an injury on competition. A practice that injured consumers, even grievously, did not violate the FTC Act unless it also damaged the competitive process. That decision meant that deceiving consumers into buying an unsafe health cure, as was at issue in that 1931 case, did not violate Section 5 unless the deception also injured a rival business. That was a problem. A huge range of abusive conduct could wreak havoc on consumers without injuring a single competitor, at least not in ways that the Commission could easily prove. After 1931, there was nothing the Commission could do about that conduct. As one of my predecessors put it, the court's 1931 decision meant that a consumer could not be protected in his own right, but only as an incident to the protection of the honest businessman. This simply could not stand. We could not have a legal regime which permitted businesses to devour their customers so long as they refrained from devouring one another. The reason for antitrust is not only, not even principally, the predation of big business on small business, but the predation of unduly powerful business on our fellow citizens. Whether that power is achieved by market dominance or by deception makes no difference to the citizen. He is injured just the same. In 1938, Congress responded to the Supreme Court's decision by adopting the Wheeler-Lee Act. That law added a prohibition against unfair or deceptive business acts or practices to the Commission's prosecutorial authority. The act thus made clear what before was only implicit, that our goal is to protect Americans from unfair dealing, whether they be business owners, employees, or consumers. Now, you may be slightly surprised to hear me talk about consumer protection at this conference, But any conservative, populist, or nationalist who cares about corporate power needs to care about consumer protection no less than antitrust. There is a feeling in this country that parts of the economy do not work well for ordinary citizens. Antitrust laws are one of the most important tools the government has to protect the common good from self-serving corporate power. But I've seen this focus on antitrust sometimes go too far. Its proponents treat the antitrust laws as a balm for a multitude of social ills, which in turn can lead to unrealistic expectations about what those laws can do. But more importantly, this view of antitrust obscures other important tools that protect the little guy from abusive power, including consumer protection law. In fact, consumer protection law was born from the identical populist impulse as antitrust law. It is aimed at the same social problem, protecting ordinary citizens from the abuses of powerful business interests. And so I encourage all of you to begin to think of consumer protection law as a tool no less critical than antitrust, and in some ways even more critical, to making our economy work for ordinary citizens and not merely the powerful. Consumer protection enforcement has some advantages over competition cases. Antitrust law is complicated. Price fixing, bid rigging, market allocation, those are straightforward. But beyond that, one enters into the world of diversion ratios, market definition, the Herfindahl-Hirschman index, market power, the hypothetical monopolist test, the SNP test, and unilateral and coordinated effects. We all agree that competition is good, but determining when it has been defeated is a task of almost unparalleled complexity. And as one of the leading young lights of the Antitrust Academy recently pointed out, even the concept of competition is itself a bit of an elusive abstraction. Consumer protection, by contrast, implements the law written on the hearts of all men, that cheating is wrong. The bait and switch or the pyramid scheme are as old as time. Everyone is familiar with such scams, and some of us have been a victim of them. Nevertheless, these scams proliferate because they work. And they work because they weaponize the presumption of honest dealing and mutual trust that citizens of a common nation expect from one another. In the hands of a traveling salesman, this weaponization is limited in its effects. A particular community suffers, and they become suspicious of traveling salesmen. But in the hands of a corporate behemoth, this weaponization can have catastrophic effects. Millions of our citizens suffer, and they become suspicious not just of big business as such, but of the very presumption that our nation is based on, honest dealing and mutual trust among its citizens. And without that presumption, we are in no better position than the People's Republic of China or other like societies that, due to the lack of social trust, must retain their nation's social fabric through the threat of force. To be sure, proving deception or unfairness in particular cases can be complex, and defining the outer boundary of unfair conduct can be tricky. But the core of consumer protection law is the preservation of honesty and fair dealing, the foundation of a successful economy and society. One need not have a grand theory of political economy to understand why we will not survive without honesty and fair dealing, and why the government must go to great lengths to protect those virtues. The relative simplicity of consumer protection principles means that consumer protection litigation is often far less costly than antitrust litigation. Merger cases move relatively quickly, but antitrust conduct cases, particularly monopolization cases, take many years to investigate and litigate. These cases are also resource intensive. Expert costs alone can run into the tens of millions of dollars. Consumer protection cases, by contrast, generally take much less time and money to litigate, in part because the consumer protection laws are more straightforward than the antitrust laws. Federal enforcers can therefore pursue more wrongful conduct with consumer protection cases over a given period of time than they can with antitrust cases. Consumer protection law also has certain remedial advantages when compared to antitrust conduct cases. The federal government generally lacks the authority to recover money for citizens who are injured by antitrust violations. Moreover, in monopolization cases, the judiciary has shown some reluctance to impose major structural changes to markets as a remedy for proven monopolies. This can lead to injunctive decrees aimed at changing a monopolist's behavior without changing structural incentives. a sometimes dissatisfying outcome. But in consumer protection cases, the FTC is often able to return money wrongfully taken from consumers back into their pockets, as well as to recover large civil penalty awards against firms who cheat consumers. Injunctions in these cases are also relatively straightforward compared to antitrust, aimed at prohibiting the illegal conduct and ensuring the violator does not repeat it. The public payoff for consumer protection cases, money to the injured, fines to punish the offender, and a court order stopping the bad behavior, is straightforward and often very effective. That public payoff makes consumer protection law very popular. When an American is victimized by some fraudster, it is deeply meaningful to them as an American to see their public representatives use their government power to punish the fraudster and restore what was stolen. Apart from prosecuting and imprisoning criminals, the proper use of our Consumer Protection Authority is perhaps the most tangible piece of evidence we can provide to citizens that our nation is indeed a nation where the government serves the governed. That is why I have pursued an unapologetically aggressive consumer protection enforcement agenda for the last 15 months. Indeed, under President Trump, the FTC returned more money to consumers in 1 year than the Biden administration did in 4. Just a few months ago, the FTC imposed a historic $1 billion fine against Amazon and required them to pay an additional $1.5 billion in restitution to over 35 million consumers who were signed up for and thus paid for an Amazon Prime subscription without their consent. Our victory, and perhaps even more Amazon's surrender, sent a clear message to the American public. No one is above the law, and civil servants in government can identify lawbreakers, successfully prosecute them, and compel them, when necessary, to make meaningful restitution to those they have harmed. Amazon was not alone in perpetuating this sort of scheme. Other fraudsters got in on the act as well. Whether it was Instacart or Match.com allegedly making false promises of free services, or Chegg allegedly charging customers who attempted to cancel their subscriptions, or Uber allegedly enrolling customers into subscription services without their consent, or Greystar allegedly deceiving American families about the full cost of renting a home, or LA Fitness allegedly imposing subscription traps on gym customers, or the old-school bait-and-switch tactics that Ticketmaster allegedly practiced. Millions of Americans were victimized by this web of lies, false promises, and deceit. Like Amazon, none of these schemes have evaded the FTC's attention, and most have been compelled to pay millions of dollars in restitution to Americans they have wronged. But returning to consumers funds they paid in reliance on corporations' false promises is not the only meaningful redress consumer protection law can provide. Under my leadership, the Trump-Vance FTC is also focused on investigations and enforcement actions into deceptive conduct and unfair practices, even when any check for money would be unlikely to redress the consumer harm. Recently, for example, the Commission initiated an investigation into whether pediatric gender dysphoria treatment, medical treatments such as hormone therapy or even genital surgery sold to minors and their parents, involved potential deceptive representations or unfair practices. It did so after evaluating the ongoing public discourse on the issue, hosting a commission workshop where the commission heard from medical professionals, other experts, and children and families who had undergone that medical treatment, and reviewed over 8,000 comments submitted in response to the commission's request for information. To that end, the Commission issued civil investigative demands to medical organizations that have published documents and made public statements on this type of medical treatment to learn more and to redress any potential consumer injury. Any amount of monetary redress to consumers harmed by such medical treatments would never fully redress those injuries. As law enforcers and civil servants, however, our aim is to ensure fidelity to the law and to ensure justice for fellow citizens harmed by its violation. A Republican government does not lord over its citizens as inferior subjects, but serves its citizens by protecting their rights and advancing their interests. When citizens see justice done and restitution is made, they are reaffirmed in their belief that ours is a Republican government that exists to serve all its citizens, and not a tyrannical government that exists to serve the partisan and material interests of a few rich and powerful men and companies. But our agency's Consumer Protection Authority is not only a means of preserving justice between our citizens, and politically popular to boot. It's also a powerful tool to advance a core goal of any truly America First approach to antitrust, promoting the ingenuity and livelihood of American workers, the success of the businesses that employ them, and the quality of the products they create in our very backyard. An overwhelming number of Americans, both Republican and Democrat, want to purchase products from American manufacturers made by American workers. As the nation's premier consumer protection authority, the FTC's job is to ensure that no company profits from the bipartisan consumer consensus by making false or unsubstantiated claims that their product is made in the USA. In doing so, we not only protect consumers from deceptive advertising, but also promote consumer confidence that their purchases will benefit only those companies who really do manufacture their products right here in the USA. That's not the only way we can utilize our Consumer Protection Authority to promote the interests of our nation's workers. Just as we protect consumers from false and misleading advertising, so too we protect workers from false and misleading terms of employment, business opportunities, or other unfair practices that defraud workers out of their hard-earned pay. Just a few weeks ago, the Commission approved a $100 million settlement with Walmart to resolve allegations that it was deceiving delivery drivers about what they would be paid. In the past year, we also secured numerous settlements banning businesses from ever selling and marketing false business opportunities again. And just this week, we announced the largest ever penalty for deceiving franchisees about what they would earn by opening a franchise business. Consumer protection is therefore a powerful tool to protect American workers. In emphasizing the role that consumer protection can play in a truly conservative and America First approach to antitrust, I do not mean to downplay the importance of trust busting. That is, the prevention of anti-competitive conduct via monopolization or anti-competitive mergers and acquisitions. And I will put the Trump-Vance FTC's record against any FTC in history. In early 2025, the FTC successfully blocked a proposed merger between two of our nation's largest grocery chains that would have raised prices for millions of American families already struggling with the rising costs at the grocery store. And we have brought 4 major merger challenges in the last year alone, including 3 in healthcare markets. We recently scored a major victory in federal court that blocked a proposed merger that would have eliminated robust competition in the market for life-saving medical devices that treat severe heart disease. Our action assured that millions of Americans affected by severe heart disease can be confident that they are paying competitive prices for innovative and higher quality health care. On the conduct front, we have focused our efforts on protecting American workers and lowering the cost of living. We negotiated a landmark competition and consumer protection settlement against one of the country's largest pharmacy benefits managers that will save Americans billions of dollars on prescription drugs, impose radical new pricing and transparency requirements, and protect thousands of community pharmacists from abusive reimbursement practices. We've brought multiple major cases against unlawful non-compete or no-hire agreements, protecting the wages and mobility of thousands of American workers across the country. We sued Zillow and Redfin for an illegal combination that could raise rental prices across the country. We are litigating against John Deere for preventing farmers from repairing their own tractors. We're litigating against 2 major pesticide manufacturers for maintaining allegedly illegal agreements that have increased the price of pesticide for American farmers. And we forced America's truck manufacturers to abandon an anti-competitive agreement that would have increased the cost of shipping across the whole country. And we have major non-public investigations on a variety of potential anti-competitive conduct in multiple markets. This is America First Antitrust in action. Vigorous enforcement of our nation's existing antitrust laws that ensure business prosperity and the prosperity of all of the citizens of our nation go together hand in hand. When economic prosperity is truly national prosperity, as an American First antitrust seeks, citizens should enjoy a competitive wage by which they can feed their children, take care of their sick, and build their homes and businesses, and contribute in innumerable ways to the material, political, and spiritual life of our great nation. That's what we tried to do this past year at the FTC, and there is much, much more to come. We've also taken seriously the danger that economic power poses to our national civic life. Last year, as part of a settlement concerning a merger between two of the nation's top advertising agencies, the FTC secured an agreement that they would not use their market power to maintain unlawful advertising boycotts, including the imposition of a monitor to ensure they will comply with this order. In a similar vein, the FTC is presently investigating whether advertising agencies or technology platforms are engaged in viewpoint discrimination that would constitute a potential violation of our antitrust or consumer protection laws. Our case against Meta, which alleges that Meta maintained monopoly power over the social media market and which makes it easier for Meta to censor viewpoints or control political discourse, is on appeal at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. And in partnership with the Department of Justice, the FTC filed an amicus brief supporting claims that BlackRock engaged in an anti-competitive conspiracy to drive down coal production for the purpose of advancing their own ideological and political agenda. A truly conservative approach to antitrust must be one that acts to prevent concentrated power, whether in government, industry, or some collusion of the two, that impedes the political independence of our nation's citizens, and the FTC will continue to follow that approach as long as I'm chairman. Our nation is founded on a Republican vision of self-rule, a nation of laws, not men, much less a few men whose prosperity depends, in the words of Teddy Roosevelt, on lowering wages of workmen, charging an excessive price to consumers, and swindling investors or getting unfair advantages over business rivals. And our antitrust laws reflect that Republican conviction so eloquently stated by one of their namesakes, Senator John Sherman, a conservative Republican, that if we will not endure a king as a political power, we should not endure a king over the production, transportation, and sale of any necessities of life. The purpose of any society is to promote the flourishing of all its members. Government tyranny is always a threat to that flourishing, and in some cases, private aggregations of power can pose the same kind of threat to human flourishing as government tyranny. But private aggregations of power pose a particular threat to a republic when they abuse their power that citizens in desperation are thus tempted to turn to government tyranny to stop those powerful aggregations of private power. A truly conservative approach to antitrust must navigate between those who advocate for private prosperity without consideration of its justice and those who advocate for justice without any consideration of private prosperity. Both views assume falsely that we cannot be prosperous without being unjust. Business is either profitable and ignoble, or it is noble and unprofitable. We all know those who trade in such false dichotomies, and we should reject them. For both suppose that the clash between private prosperity and justice is an essential feature of a Republican government such as ours. But it is not an essential feature of a Republican government. It is a deviation, the result of public officials failing to enforce our laws that prohibit unjust conduct in business, whether big or small. If we take a vigorous approach to enforcing our laws that protect rival businesses and consumers from unjust treatment by businesses large and small, we will create the conditions for a just and prosperous nation in which a greater number of the small men who are decent, industrious, and energetic shall be able to succeed, and the big man who is dishonest shall not be allowed to succeed at all. With those words, Teddy Roosevelt laid down a sound principle and roadmap for a truly conservative approach to an American